The Obsidian 7 military complex didn't so much sit on the planet's surface as it dominated it. A sprawling testament to what happens when 17 different species decide they need a unified training ground, and nobody can agree on architectural aesthetics. The result was a glorious mess of angular Vrexian battlements smashed against flowing Heliorian biodomes, all connected by the brutally efficient Sithari transit tubes that looked like someone had given up halfway through and just welded metal pipes wherever they'd fit. It was, by all accounts, the galaxy's premier institution for turning soft civilians into hardened soldiers. It was also, by those same accounts, an excellent place to discover you'd made a terrible career choice. The dropout rate hovered at a comfortable 67%, which the Academy brass liked to spin as maintaining standards, rather than systematically destroying the will to live of every recruit who walks through our doors. Imogen had arrived 3 weeks ago with 42 other fresh-faced cadets from a dozen different worlds. They'd stood in neat little rows during orientation, while a Heliorian administrator with too many eyes and not enough patience had explained the glorious opportunity before them. Military service across the Galactic Compact. Honor. Prestige. A pension plan that was apparently quite competitive if you survived long enough to collect it. What the administrator hadn't mentioned, probably because it was written in foot-high letters across every surface of the complex, was that survival was very much the optional part of that equation. Imogen stood now in Formation Bay 12, which was really just a fancy name for giant warehouse where they store cadets before doing terrible things to them. Around her, various species shifted nervously. To her left, a Cathari named Brennix kept flexing all 4 of his arms in what she'd learned was their species equivalent of anxious knuckle-cracking. To her right, Praxon, a Heliorian whose bioluminescent skin patterns had been showing off for the past 20 minutes, radiated the kind of confidence that usually preceded spectacular failure. She'd watched 17 cadets wash out in 3 weeks. Most went home with their dignity intact, if not their pride. 2 had gone home in medical pods. One particularly unfortunate Yulani had discovered that humans weren't the only species capable of stress-induced hair loss, though in their case it had been scales, which seemed significantly more concerning. The bay doors groaned open with the kind of mechanical shriek that suggested routine maintenance was more of a suggestion than a requirement. Every cadet's attention snapped forward. Drillmaster Uxhorn entered like a natural disaster with a rank insignia. 8 feet of scaled muscle and ambient menace, the Vrexian moved with the casual grace of something that had never encountered a threat it couldn't simply bite in half. His species had evolved on a death world where the plants were carnivorous. The water was acidic, and the local wildlife considered peaceful coexistence to be a cute myth that weaker species told themselves before being eaten. Uxhorn wore his service record like a second skin. 30 years of combat operations, 12 planetary campaigns, and a teaching assignment that was either a reward or a punishment depending on who you asked. His eyes, all 3 of them, because Vrexians believed in redundancy, swept across the assembled cadets with the kind of assessment usually reserved for meat at market. Cadets, his voice rumbled out like tectonic plates having a disagreement. You are about to participate in Exercise Crucible, our beloved jungle survival training. I say beloved because the jungle certainly loves it. It loves it very much. It loves eating cadets who think their fancy academy training means they're ready for real threats. A nervous ripple went through the formation. Imogen kept her face carefully neutral. She'd learned early that showing emotion around Uxhorn was like showing blood around predators. It only encouraged him. The maw, Uxhorn continued, clearly enjoying himself now, is 200 square kilometers of concentrated hostility. The plant life is carnivorous. The animal life is carnivorous. Even some of the rocks are questionably carnivorous, though xenobiology is still arguing about that one. He began pacing, his talons clicking against the metal floor. Last cycle, we lost 4 cadets to equipment failure, 3 to predator attacks, 1 to what we're officially calling catastrophic decision-making skills, because their family requested we not use the phrase terminal stupidity in the report. Praxon shifted beside Imogen, his bioluminescence flickering. Good. Nervous was better than cocky, though she suspected he'd swing back to cocky the moment they were deployed. You will be issued standard survival kits, Uxhorn announced. Energy weapons with a 7-day charge, emergency beacons, ration packs that taste like despair but contain adequate nutrition, medical supplies for those of you smart enough to use them before bleeding out. His center eye focused on a particularly small Yulani cadet who looked like they were reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. Some of you will quit within the first day. This is acceptable. Some of you will be extracted due to injury. This is expected. Some of you will die. This is regrettable but statistically inevitable. The temperature in the bay seemed to drop several degrees. The exercise, Uxhorn said, his voice shifting from threatening to merely terrifying, lasts 7 days. Reach the extraction point. Survive. Try not to make me fill out more paperwork than necessary. Dismissed for equipment distribution. You deploy at dawn. The formation broke with the kind of controlled chaos that came from military discipline fighting against the primal urge to run screaming. Imogen moved toward the equipment lockers with the crowd, her mind already running calculations. Standard energy weapons. Perfect for most species. Reliable, simple, effective. Also completely dependent on power cells that would drain faster in high-humidity environments. Also useless if you encountered anything with natural electromagnetic shielding. Also, and this was the important part, given to everyone else. She'd done her research. The Maw wasn't just hostile. It was specifically hostile to technology. Something about the local fungal spores interfered with power systems. The Academy knew this. They designed the exercise around it. Most cadets would adapt, learn to conserve power, work together. It was a team-building exercise wrapped in genuine danger. But Imogen hadn't left Earth and crossed half the galaxy to be most cadets. The equipment sergeant, a bored-looking Heliorian who'd clearly distributed gear to 1,000 doomed cadets before, barely looked up as she approached. Name? Imogen. Species? Human. That got a flicker of interest. Humans were still relatively new to the compact, novel enough to be curious about, common enough to not be exotic. The sergeant pulled up her file. Standard loadout. Energy rifle, Model 7, survival kit, template 3. Any special requirements? Actually, Imogen said carefully, I'd like to request alternative equipment. The sergeant's expression shifted from bored to confused. Alternative? I'd prefer primitive weapons. Bow, arrows, basic blade. No power requirements. The confusion deepened into something approaching concern, like maybe the human had suffered some kind of head injury during training. Cadet, the standard equipment is designed for optimal survival. Energy weapons are dependent on power cells that will fail in high-humidity environments with electromagnetic interference, Imogen finished. I've read the terrain reports. Then you should know that energy weapons are still your best option. Primitive weapons are what my species used for thousands of years before we had energy weapons. I'm comfortable with them. The sergeant stared at her. Then, with the universal gesture of someone deciding this wasn't their problem, they shrugged. Request denied. Standard equipment only. If you want to fail, do it with regulation gear like everyone else. Imogen accepted the rifle and kit without further argument. No point fighting battles you couldn't win. Besides, she'd expected the denial. That's why she'd spent the last 3 weeks collecting scraps. The Academy complex generated waste, broken furniture, damaged equipment, organic material from the biodomes. Most of it went to recycling, but some of it ended up in cadet-accessible areas. Nobody paid attention to a human collecting wood scraps and flexible branches. Nobody noticed when synthetic fibers from damaged uniforms disappeared. Nobody questioned why she'd requisitioned extra adhesive from the engineering labs for a personal project. In her locker, carefully hidden beneath regulation items, sat the components of her actual survival kit. 60 centimeters of flexible composite wood, bent and cured over 2 weeks. Synthetic cord that could handle 200 pounds of tension. 30 arrows in various stages of completion, fletched with recycled materials, tipped with sharpened metal scavenged from broken equipment. A bow, primitive, ancient, requiring no power source except her own muscles. Also, and this was the entertaining part, completely within regulations, because nowhere in the Academy handbook did it say cadets couldn't bring their own supplementary equipment. Imogen returned to her bunk and began final preparations. Around her, other cadets checked their energy weapons, calibrated their beacons, and tried to project confidence they clearly didn't feel. Praxon was holding court in the corner, explaining to anyone who'd listen how his superior Heliorian reflexes would make the exercise trivial. Brennick sat alone, methodically organizing his kit with all four hands, the picture of Cathari efficiency. Nobody paid attention to the human sitting quietly on her bunk, running her fingers along a curved piece of composite wood that would look like junk to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Dawn was 6 hours away. The maw was waiting. Drillmaster Uxhorn had made it clear that the jungle devoured cadets with enthusiasm. Imogen smiled. Let it try. She'd brought her own teeth to this fight. Dawn on Obsidian 7 wasn't so much a sunrise as it was the planet grudgingly admitting that darkness couldn't last forever. The sky shifted from black to a sullen purple-gray that suggested the local star was showing up for work but wasn't happy about it. The dropship bay hummed with nervous energy and the smell of 42 different species anxiety, which created an olfactory experience that could generously be described as biological warfare by committee. Imogen stood in her deployment line, regulation gear strapped to her back, non-regulation gear carefully concealed within it. The bow had been disassembled into components that looked like random debris to anyone not actively searching for weapons. The arrows were bundled and marked as surveying equipment, because apparently nobody in supply chain management questioned why a cadet might need 30 identical metal rods for surveying. Drillmaster Uxhorn prowled between the lines like a predator inspecting prey that he was legally obligated not to eat yet. His center eye fixed on Imogen for a moment, long enough that she felt the weight of his assessment, before moving on. If he suspected anything, he didn't show it. Then again, Vrexians had evolved poker faces back when Earth's ancestors were still figuring out how to breathe air without drowning in it. Listen carefully. Uxhorn's voice cut through the nervous chatter. Because I'm only explaining this once and I don't accept I wasn't paying attention as an excuse for dying stupidly. He gestured to the holographic display that materialized above the bay. The maw, 200 square kilometers of evolutionary spite. You will be deployed at random coordinates across the zone. Your objective is simple. Survive 7 days and reach the extraction point here. A red marker appeared on the northeastern edge of the map. The terrain will try to kill you. The wildlife will try to kill you. The weather will try to kill you. Each other will probably try to kill you at some point because competition brings out the worst in people. Try to resist that last one. Command frowns on cadet homicide. Looks bad in the brochures. Praxon laughed. Nobody else did. Praxon stopped laughing. Your energy weapons have a 7-day charge under optimal conditions. Uxhorn continued. The maw is not optimal conditions. Conserve your power, work together, use your training, or don't. I get paid either way. His eyes swept across them one final time. Board your transports. Try not to die immediately. It's embarrassing for everyone involved. The dropships were designed by Cathari engineers, which meant they prioritized function over comfort to a degree that suggested the designers actively hated their passengers. Imogen strapped into a harness clearly meant for someone with a different skeletal structure and tried to find a position that didn't cut off circulation to important limbs. The ship lifted with all the grace of a drunk carrying furniture. Through the viewport, the Academy complex fell away, replaced by the sprawling green hell of the maw. From altitude, it looked almost beautiful. A sea of emerald canopy broken by the occasional cliff face or river system. From altitude, you couldn't see the carnivorous plants. You couldn't see the predators. You couldn't see the bones of previous cadets who'd learned the hard way that beautiful and safe were not synonyms. The pilot's voice crackled through the comm system. 30 seconds to first drop. Remember, tuck and roll. Don't try to land on your feet unless you want to mail your kneecaps home separately. Imogen checked her harness one final time. Around her, other cadets did the same with varying levels of panic. A Yulani across from her was making a sound that was either a prayer or severe digestive distress. Possibly both. 10 seconds. Good luck. Try not to haunt me. The bay doors opened. Wind screamed into the transport. The harness released. And then Imogen was falling. The descent lasted 3 seconds and felt like 3 hours. The emergency chute deployed automatically at 50 meters, jerking her skyward before dropping her into the canopy with all the gentleness of a tactical strike. Branches slapped, grabbed, and generally expressed their disapproval of her presence before she crashed through to the forest floor in a heap that was 90% dignity loss and 10% actual injury. She lay there for a moment, taking inventory. Arms, functional. Legs, present and responding to commands. Pride, wounded but recoverable. Gear, mostly intact, though her regulation kit had deployed its contents across 3 meters of forest floor like the world's worst yard sale. Imogen gathered her equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced this exact scenario in her head approximately 300 times. The bow components came out first, hidden among the regulation debris. 2 minutes of assembly. Fit the limbs, string the cord, test the tension. It flexed beautifully, the composite wood bending exactly as she'd calculated during those late-night construction sessions. The arrows came next, pulled from their disguised bundle, and slotted into the improvised quivers she'd fashioned from recycled materials. They weren't perfect. The fletching was asymmetric. The tips were repurposed metal rather than proper broadheads, and any archer from Earth would have laughed themselves sick at the craftsmanship. But they'd fly. They'd penetrate. They'd kill. That was enough. The jungle around her pulsed with life and imminent violence. Bioluminescent fungi created pools of blue-green light in the shadows. Something in the canopy made a sound like screaming metal being tortured. The air was thick enough to chew, humid and heavy with the smell of decomposition and things that ate decomposers. Imogen consulted her tactical display. A wrist-mounted unit that currently showed her position as a blue dot in a sea of topographical data. The extraction point was 47 kilometers northeast. 7 days. Average 7 kilometers per day, accounting for terrain and the inevitable complications that came from operating in an environment actively trying to murder you. She'd covered maybe 300 meters when she encountered Praxin. The Heliorian was examining his energy rifle with the kind of intense focus that suggested something had gone wrong, and he was trying to will it back to rightness through sheer determination. His bioluminescent patterns were flickering erratically. Anger, frustration, and a hint of fear that he was trying very hard to suppress. "Equipment malfunction?" Imogen asked, keeping her distance. Startled cadets with weapons were dangerous regardless of species. Praxin's head snapped up, multiple eyes focusing on her with the kind of intensity that came from being caught vulnerable. "Battery drain. 20% already. That's impossible. I just charged." He stopped, actually looking at her for the first time. "What is that?" Imogen realized he was staring at the bow. "Backup equipment. That's a primitive weapon. That's a functional weapon that doesn't need a battery." Praxin's patterns shifted to something that looked like condescension mixed with pity. "You brought a stick to a survival exercise. I brought a tool that works regardless of power supply. You brought a paperweight with a 7-day timer." Whatever response Praxin was forming died in his throat as something massive crashed through the underbrush 30 meters away. Both cadets froze. The jungle had gone suddenly, ominously quiet. The kind of quiet that in nature documentaries preceded footage of graphic violence and narrator commentary about the circle of life. The creature that emerged from the foliage looked like evolution had gotten drunk and combined the worst features of every ambush predator in the galaxy. 6 legs, each ending in claws designed for gripping and tearing. armored carapace that glistened with some kind of natural secretion, a head that was mostly mouth, and a mouth that was mostly teeth, a hexapod ambush beast, native to the maw, known for aggressive territorial behavior and a diet that consisted primarily of anything stupid enough to enter its territory. They'd entered its territory. Praxin raised his rifle. The movement was smooth, trained, exactly what they drilled in combat scenarios. His finger found the trigger. He squeezed. The rifle whined. The power indicator flickered. The shot that should have been a concentrated beam of coherent energy came out as a pathetic spark that wouldn't have stunned a particularly motivated insect. The hexapod charged. Praxin dove left. Imogen went right. The creature blasted between them, its momentum carrying it past in a fury of claws and frustrated hunger. It skidded to a stop, head swiveling, multiple eyes trying to track two targets simultaneously. Praxin was shouting something in his native language that probably wasn't complimentary to anyone's ancestry. His rifle was completely dead now, the power indicator showing nothing but dark emptiness. He fumbled for his backup blade, a standard-issue combat knife that looked very small compared to the creature currently deciding which cadet to eat first. Imogen moved without thinking, muscle memory and 3 weeks of secret practice taking over. She drew, knocked, anchored, and released in one fluid motion that would have made her archery instructor back on Earth weep with pride. The arrow flew. It wasn't a perfect shot. Perfect would have been the eye, instant kill. Minimal suffering for the creature that was just following its biological imperatives. Instead, the arrow caught the hexapod in its forward shoulder, or what passed for a shoulder on something with 6 legs and a body plan that suggested its evolutionary ancestors had given up on anatomical sensibility. The creature screamed. It was the kind of sound that would haunt nightmares for weeks afterward. But more importantly, it stopped charging. The arrow had penetrated deep, clearly hitting something vital enough to make the beast reconsider its lunch options. Imogen had already knocked a second arrow. This one went for the head. This one didn't miss. The hexapod collapsed like someone had cut its power supply, which was ironic given that it was one of the few things in this jungle that didn't run on batteries. Silence fell over the clearing. Not the ominous predator. Silence from before. But the shocked silence that came from watching someone kill an apex predator with what amounted to a sharpened stick thrown really fast. Praxin stared at the dead creature, then at Imogen, then at the bow in her hands, then back at the creature. His bioluminescent patterns cycled through colors that probably had names in Heliorian but in any language translated roughly to, "What the actual hell just happened?" "You," he started, stopped. Tried again. "That thing, you just, with a stick, with a bow." Imogen corrected, already moving to retrieve her arrows. Waste not, want not, especially when you only had 30 arrows and 7 days of survival ahead. The first arrow was ruined, the tip bent beyond repair from hitting bone. She discarded it after removing the salvageable shaft. The second came out clean, the metal tip still sharp, the fletching intact. She wiped it on the jungle floor and returned it to her quiver. "Your rifle is dead," she observed, checking the creature's body for anything useful. The carapace was too thick to harvest easily, but some of the sinew might work for bowstring repairs. "That fungal spore interference Uxhorn mentioned?" "It's worse than the briefing suggested. You'll be lucky if your battery lasts another day at this rate." Praxin looked at his rifle like it had personally betrayed him. "This is military-grade equipment. It's supposed to work under optimal conditions. This is the maw. Nothing here is optimal." Imogen finished her harvesting and stood. "You should head for the extraction point. 7 days is a long time to survive without a functional weapon." She started walking. Behind her, Praxin stood in the clearing with his dead rifle and his wounded pride, watching the human disappear into the jungle with her primitive stick and her working arrows. In the Academy's command center, Drillmaster Uxhorn watched the tactical feed with his 3 eyes fixed on a single blue indicator dot. the dot representing the human cadet who just killed an ambush beast with equipment that belonged in a museum. Interesting, he rumbled to himself. Very interesting indeed. The jungle had tried to devour a cadet. The cadet had shot back. This was going to be an entertaining week. Day 3 in the maw, and the jungle had officially stopped pretending to play fair. The fungal spore concentration had apparently decided that subtlety was for losers and ramped up to levels that would make a mycologist weep with scientific joy and everyone else weep with actual despair. Every piece of technology more sophisticated than a pointed stick was dying faster than career prospects at a military academy, with a 67% dropout rate. Imogen crouched behind a moss-covered boulder, watching the tactical disaster unfold 30 meters downslope. 3 cadets, species she didn't immediately recognize in the dim bioluminescent light, were frantically slapping their equipment like that had ever fixed anything in the history of malfunctioning technology. Their energy weapons were dead. Their emergency beacons were dark. Their communication devices had given up and were probably filing for early retirement. One of them was shouting something that sounded like cursing but could have been prayer. The other 2 had drawn combat knives and were standing back to back, which was tactically sound if you ignored the part where they were surrounded by approximately 7 creatures that looked like nightmares had bred with worse nightmares and produced offspring that specialized in eating cadets who'd lost their high-tech advantages. Imogen sighed. She could walk away. Should walk away. This was a survival exercise, not a rescue mission. Helping other cadets wasn't explicitly forbidden, but it wasn't encouraged either. The Academy's philosophy leaned heavily toward forge your own path or die trying. Either way we get data. But walking away felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with regulations and everything to do with the fact that she was human, and humans had a terrible habit of helping people, even when it was strategically inadvisable. She drew an arrow, tested the wind, minimal, thank whatever gods governed this hellscape, and picked her first target. The creatures were circling, working themselves up to attack formation. Pack hunters, intelligent enough to coordinate. Stupid enough to not notice the human with the bow 50 meters upslope. Their mistake. The first arrow took the lead predator through the skull. Clean kill, instant drop. The pack scattered in confusion, trying to identify the threat. Imogen was already knocking her second arrow. The second shot caught another predator mid-leap. Not a kill shot, she'd rushed it. But the creature went down screaming, and that was almost better because now the pack was panicking. Predators were brave when they had overwhelming advantage. Take away the advantage, and they remembered that getting killed while hunting was terrible for life expectancy. The remaining 5 creatures bolted into the underbrush like someone had announced mandatory formation drill. Imogen descended the slope, bow ready, eyes scanning for secondary threats. The 3 cadets stared at her with the universal expression of people whose world view had just been violently readjusted. "Your weapons are dead," she observed, retrieving her arrows. The kill shot was still good. The second arrow's tip was bent. She grimaced and discarded it. Down to 26 arrows. Math was becoming uncomfortable. "Everything's dead," one of the cadets replied. Cathari, she realized now, seeing the forearms more clearly in better light. Male, judging by the vocal patterns. "Power cells failed 6 hours ago. Comms went dark 3 hours after that. We're blind out here." "Not blind," Imogen corrected. "You've got eyes, you've got hands, you've got 7 days of training that didn't involve batteries." She gestured at the jungle around them. "This environment is hostile, but it's not impossible. Humans survived worse with less. Humans didn't have to deal with carnivorous plants and electromagnetic interference," another cadet muttered. "Humans dealt with carnivorous plants, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, predators with better teeth, faster legs, and actual venom. We survived because we adapted. You can too." She checked her tactical display, still functional, barely, showing 23 cadets remaining active. 19 dropouts or casualties in 3 days. The math was ugly. "Extraction point is northeast, 42 kilometers. Move during daylight, shelter at night. Avoid anything that looks hungry. You'll make it." The Sithari, Brennix, his uniform tag read, studied her with all four eyes. "You're helping us." "Why?" Imogen considered the question. Why was she helping? Because it was right? Because humans were pack animals who helped their pack? Because leaving people to die when you could prevent it was the kind of thing that kept you awake at night with regret? "Because," she said finally, "we're all trying to survive the same nightmare. Might as well survive it together." She started to leave. Brennix's voice stopped her. "Wait, you're heading to extraction?" "Eventually. Scouting first, making sure the path is clear." "Can we?" He hesitated, pride warring with pragmatism. "Can we travel with you? At least until our backup power cells recharge enough for basic functions." Imogen looked at the three cadets, looked at their dead equipment, looked at the jungle that was absolutely going to kill them if they went alone. "Keep up," she said. "And if something tries to eat us, don't scream. It just encourages them." In the command center, Drillmaster Uxhorn watched the human's indicator merge with 3 other dots. His center eye narrowed thoughtfully. "Interesting choice, cadet," he rumbled. "Let's see if compassion gets you killed or makes you stronger." He opened a private comm channel, bypassing standard protocols. Time to see what this human was really made of. The message transmitted. In the jungle, Imogen's communicator, one of the few devices still barely functional, buzzed with an incoming message from the one person whose opinion on her survival strategy actually mattered. This was about to get complicated. Day 7 arrived with the enthusiasm of a student realizing finals were today, and they'd studied nothing. The extraction point sat 3 kilometers ahead through terrain that could generously be called aggressively vertical, and accurately be called a geological middle finger to anyone trying to cross it. Imogen's group had grown to 6 cadets, Brennix and his 2 companions, plus another Heliorian and a Yulani she'd found hiding in a cave system, convinced the jungle had developed a personal vendetta against them specifically. Her arrow count, 11. Her energy, depleted. Her patience with this exercise, exhausted 3 days ago. The communicator buzzed. Uxhorn's message was brief and characteristically unhelpful. "Apex predator between you and extraction. Suggest avoiding it. Or don't. Your funeral." "Helpful," Imogen muttered. Brennix looked over her shoulder at the message. "Apex predator. That's the armored behemoth, yes? The one that took down 5 cadets yesterday." "That would be the one. And we're walking toward it. We're walking toward extraction. If it happens to be in the way, we'll adapt." They crested the ridge an hour later and found the behemoth exactly where the tactical display suggested it would be. Directly in their path, looking like evolution had designed the perfect cadet killing machine, and then added extra killing features just to show off. 4 meters tall, armored hide that probably laughed at energy weapons when they were functional, claws that could disembowel anything stupid enough to get close, intelligence in those eyes that suggested it understood tactics, strategy, and the general concept of making cadets regret their life choices. Behind the behemoth, clearly visible, sat the extraction zone. Ships were already landing, collecting the cadets who'd made it. So close. Might as well have been on another planet. "We could go around," the Yulani suggested hopefully. "Around is 15 kilometers, through is 200 meters. Imogen studied the creature, watching its movement patterns, its attention cycles, the way it favored its left side slightly. Old injury, maybe. Weakness, definitely. "I can work with 200 meters. "You're going to shoot it," Brennix said flatly. "With 11 arrows. I'm going to shoot it with however many arrows it takes. The rest of you, when it charges, and it will charge, you scatter. Make yourselves difficult targets. Don't try to fight it, just survive." She drew an arrow. The bow creaked softly, comfortable in her hands like an old friend who'd been through hell alongside her. The behemoth noticed the movement, head swiveling, eyes locking onto her position. Time slowed in that way it does before violence. Imogen could hear her heartbeat, steady despite everything, could feel the bow's tension, perfect despite the abuse it had suffered, could see the exact spot on the behemoth's skull where armor plates met, where a precisely placed shot might penetrate deep enough to matter. She released. The arrow flew true, struck exactly where she'd aimed, penetrated deeper than she'd hoped. The behemoth roared, rage and pain, an offense that something so small had dared to hurt something so large. It charged. Imogen dove left, already knocking another arrow. The cadets scattered like she'd ordered, making themselves poor targets. The behemoth focused on her, the threat, the source of pain, the audacious human who'd brought primitive weapons to a survival exercise. 3 more arrows. 2 hit vital areas. 1 missed entirely, disappearing into the jungle canopy where it probably lodged in a tree to confuse future archaeologists. The behemoth slowed. Not dead, but dying. The kind of mortally wounded that made creatures dangerous in their final moments. It lunged one last time, claws extended, mouth open in a final roar of defiance. Imogen's last arrow took it through the open mouth, through the soft palate, into whatever passed for a brain in creatures designed by a spiteful universe. It collapsed 3 meters from her position. Silence fell over the clearing. Then, from the extraction zone, slow applause began. Imogen looked up to see Drillmaster Uxhorn standing at the perimeter, all 3 eyes fixed on her with an expression that might have been respect or might have been indigestion. With Vrexians, it was hard to tell. Cadet Imogen, his voice carried across the clearing. 17 confirmed kills with primitive weapons, 6 cadets rescued, 1 apex predator eliminated, 0 power cells expended. He paused, letting that sink in. Welcome to graduation. Try not to make the rest of us look incompetent. 3 months later, the Academy added a new training module, Primitive Warfare Tactics. The instructor was human. Her teaching aid was a composite bow that sat in a display case in the Hall of Innovation, next to energy weapons and plasma cannons and other tools of modern warfare. The plaque read, "Sometimes the oldest solutions outlast the newest problems." Imogen stood before her first class of bewildered alien cadets, holding arrows and looking deeply amused at their expressions. "Right," she said. "Who wants to learn how to make a pointy stick fly really fast?" The galaxy's most sophisticated military academy was about to get a crash course in human stubbornness. They were not ready.